An early morning arrival into Sydney marks the halfway point of our grand voyage. We're using the Sydney ferries to see some of the sights. Our first ferry takes us to Manly, a seaside town. Manly is famous for its beach and for surfing. And it's well provided with smart cafes and restaurants. On the way back, we pass the incoming ferry by the Sydney Heads. Our next ferry takes us on a tour of the southern bays. We break our journey at Watson's Bay. Watson's Bay is home to Doyle's on the Beach, the famous and expensive fish restaurant. But there's also Doyle's Takeaway, much less expensive but equally nice fish. And after a nice lunch, we continue with this circular ferry ride. Arriving back at Circular Quay, we catch a glimpse of Government House. When we retire for the night, we still have a view of the Opera House, but by the time we wake up in the morning, the view's different. We've moved to an anchorage to make way for the Queen Mary 2. For our second day in Sydney, we've booked a ship's tour to the Blue Mountains, but our first stop is at the Featherdale Reserve. This is really a private zoo with many examples of Australian species. This is a cassowary. Feeding time. They seem to prefer the cone to the healthy food. The blue penguin or little penguin. A wombat. And here comes Skippy. Here we are now in the Blue Mountains. We're in the scenic park, and the first thing we do is descend in this modern recreation of the old mining railway. The incline is 52 degrees. The blue haze that gives the mountains their name is caused by light scattering due to small particles in the air. Next, a short forest walk. And we go back up by cable car. After lunch, we go to the observation platform. Last time we were here, you couldn't see a thing. Arriving back at Circular Quay, Queen Mary 2 completely dwarfs the overseas passenger terminal. And there's Queen Victoria at anchor. The next leg of our grand voyage takes us to New Zealand, and then across the South Pacific, over the International Date Line and the Equator again, via French Polynesia, with calls in 2 islands of the Hawaiian group, before returning to Los Angeles. Our first port in New Zealand was intended to be Akaroa for Queenstown, but the remains of Cyclone Pam would have made tendering there too dangerous. So we've come to Picton instead, at the top end of South Island. That's the Commodore photographing our berthing arrangements to pass on to Queen Mary 2, which will be here the following day. Although the ship has managed to arrange some tours at short notice, we opt just to look around this small New Zealand town. This lifeboat is a memorial to a Russian cruise ship which sank nearby in 1986. With 50-knot winds forecast for the Cook Strait overnight, the Commodore orders a full-speed run to arrive in Wellington at 10 p.m. In the morning we take the shuttle into Wellington, just to have a mooch round for a couple of hours. In the afternoon we're leaving the ship for a couple of days, flying to Auckland to visit relatives. We're staying in Browns Bay with Chris and Helen and James and Jack, and this is the magnificent view from their newly extended house overlooking Browns Bay. We rejoin Queen Victoria in Auckland, and after 2 days at sea and crossing the International Date Line, we arrive in Rarotonga in the Cook Islands. We're met by Bill and Ellen, who are holidaying here, and they very kindly take us round the island in their hire car. This is the infinity pool at their hotel. This is Murray Beach. The ship also ran a shuttle here. The beachfront restaurant served us a lovely lunch and also saved us from a short, sharp shower. After a day at sea, we're in Papeete, the largest town in Tahiti and the capital of French Polynesia. Next to the dock is the Tourist Information Centre with authentic Polynesian dancing, and there's also a sort of craft stall fair. Local tours were being sold here as well, and we booked a round the island bus trip. Our first stop was Venus Point, and there's a lighthouse here designed by Robert Louis Stevenson's father. Venus Point is so called because it was here in 1769 that Captain James Cook observed the transit of Venus across the disk of the Sun, and this is a monument to that. And this is a monument to the Bounty mutineers who landed here in 1788. Our next stop is the Wharumai waterfall, and for this we need to take quite a trek over some tricky ground. Next, the water gardens of Waipahi, a small botanical garden. Our final stop, the Mara Caves, which apparently used to be used for some religious ritual purposes. Next morning, arriving in Bora Bora, which for many people turned out to be the highlight of the World Voyage. We had booked a tour yesterday while we were in Tahiti, so we take the tender across to the small dock and look for the catamaran which is due to take us. After a bit of initial confusion in finding that catamaran, it turned out to be everything we could have hoped for. There are about 35 of us sharing this catamaran that would take 60, and it sets off on its round the island trip. Past the world-famous Bloody Mary's restaurant and bar. Our first sight of a stingray, more to come. We dropped anchor so that those who wanted to could get out and swim with the fishes. Blacktip reef sharks. we stop off at the captain's house for refreshments. A hermit crab. The captain showing us how to get at the good bits of a coconut. Bora Bora is very well endowed with high-end luxury hotels. A gun emplacement from the Second World War when the United States Navy took over the island. We're just approaching the inlet where our dock is from where we started our trip. We now have 4 sea days, during which we cross the equator again into the Northern Hemisphere before arriving at the Hawaiian Islands. This time we're calling in at 2 different islands. Hilo on the Big Island, Hawaii itself, and Kahului on Maui. In Hilo we have a private tour arranged by one of our roll call members. Our first stop is the Liliuokalani Botanical Gardens. And on the opposite side of the lake, our friends Valerie and Neil. Next stop, Rainbow Falls. In full flow, but no rainbow this morning. Next stop, a viewpoint over the Kilauea caldera, steam still rising from some of the vents. In the distance, Mauna Loa, the largest active volcano in the world. Another viewpoint over the caldera of Kilauea, and down on the ground you can see people trekking across. Next, an opportunity to walk through a lava tube. This is the remains of a volcanic lava flow from 1985. Back onto Ricky's minivan to take us to our final destination. This is a black sand beach not far from the port. And we even get a chance to see a couple of turtles. Next morning we're arriving in Kahului, Maui, where we berth alongside. We're on a ship's tour today. First stop, Iao National Park. The main feature here is the 1200-foot Iao Needle. We then head to Lahaina, where our free time will be spent, and this is the place where most of the cruise ships come, but they have to anchor. This enormous banyan tree was planted in the 1870s. Lahaina was once the capital of the Kingdom of Hawaii and was a rowdy whaling port for many years, but now it exists entirely for tourism. It's very busy today, partly because of the visit of a large Princess cruise ship. Five sea days and we return to Long Beach, and this time we do exactly the same as we did last time and spend the day just wandering around and having a nice lunch. Valerie and Neil leave us here, and the next leg takes us back through the Panama Canal to the Caribbean and Fort Lauderdale. It begins with a 2-day sail down the coast of Baja California to Cabo San Lucas at the southern tip. Once a tiny fishing village, Cabo San Lucas is now one of Mexico's main tourist destinations. The beaches are lined with large resort hotels. It's an anchor port and we're not alone today, so there are a lot of cruise ship tourists coming ashore by tender to the tender dock. The harbour attracts some private yachts, and it's surrounded by cafes and restaurants. The odd marine mammal also visits the harbour. You can just about see Cabo's famous Rock Arch, and a beach that can only be reached by boat. Time to sail away, and it's 3 days at sea till we arrive in San Juan del Sur in Nicaragua. We're taking the ship's tour to the old city of Granada, but our first stop is in Masaya at the craft market, housed in the old main market building, which was designed in the style of a medieval castle. Next stop is the Mochambaya volcano. For safety reasons, we're no longer allowed to climb the steps to the viewpoint, but the vulture's not bothered about safety. Next it's lunch, where we're entertained by a band. And so to Granada, founded in 1524, making it the oldest city in mainland America. However, all the buildings have been rebuilt many times since then, due to the effects of earthquakes, wars and so on. In 1856 the entire city was burned by the American William Walker, who was attempting to make himself dictator of the whole of Central America. Finally, the convent of San Francisco. It's a long drive back to the ship and then a day at sea before we arrive once again at the Panama Canal. We've just passed under the Bridge of the Americas, and there we can see the construction site for the new locks. We're approaching the Miraflores locks, the first locks on the Pacific side. The new access channel from the new locks will bypass Miraflores and Pedro Miguel locks and lead directly into the Culebra Cut. Several hours have elapsed now and we've entered the Gatun Lake. Now entering the Gatun locks, after which we will exit the canal into the Caribbean Sea. After another sea day, we're berthed in Cartagena, Colombia. The cruise terminal here has an aviary which I think is unique. We were able to pick up a guided tour by minivan, just the two of us, for $50 US. Our first stop is the old fort on the edge of the old town. The old dungeons now house the craft market. On top of the old city walls. Down at street level now. We thought the city centre had smartened up even more since we were previously here 5 years ago. Santo Domingo Church from the mid-16th century. Cartagena's cathedral was completed in 1612 and is currently under reconstruction. Most of the nave is hidden from view. Plaza Simón Bolívar, with the statue of the man himself. The main city gate. A statue of Christopher Columbus in the Customs Square. What was once a convent is now a 5-star hotel. After another sea day, we're approaching Georgetown on Grand Cayman. the capital of the British Overseas Territory of the Cayman Islands. We pay for a minibus tour of the dockside and start our tour of the island. This place is called Hell, apparently because of the black limestone formations. The inhabitants of Hell appear to be very religious. This is the famous 7 Mile Beach. Back into Georgetown, which is very quiet. It is Sunday after all, but it's surprising that in this place, Mammon is defeated by God. Disney Wonder was the only other ship in with us today. There's another sea day before we end this leg in Fort Lauderdale, where we spend the entire day with our friends. This leg will take us to New York, and then there's a final leg non-stop across the Atlantic back to Southampton. First stop this leg is Port Canaveral, and we decide to have a quiet day. We share a taxi with other passengers to Cocoa Village. Founded in the second half of the 19th century as Indian River City, Cocoa Village now is a very pleasant resort with an affluent feel and lots of nice cafes and restaurants, as well as arty shops. We enjoyed a proper French coffee and a proper French croissant in a proper French cafe. Next morning, we're berthing alongside in Charleston, South Carolina. We've pre-booked a tour with Grey Line, and it takes us longer than we imagined to get to the Tourist Information Office where it starts. The minibus takes us through the old historical centre, and the driver, who seems to be a fount of knowledge, describes the different types of architecture that we see in the different areas of the historical city centre. At the end of the tour, we have lunch and take a leisurely stroll back through historical Charleston to the harbour. The statue on the column in Marion Square is of John C. Calhoun, a very controversial character since he was a white supremacist and strong proponent of slavery. We thought Charleston was a place we'd like to visit again. Many of the historical buildings are open to visitors. The market hall is at one end of the historic city markets. These now deal mainly in tourist items. Sailing away in the evening, we pass the Ravenel Bridge and the USS Yorktown. After a day at sea, we arrive in New York, and we're aiming for the Rockefeller Center. We're going to visit the top of the rock observation platforms from floors 67 to 70. You can just see St. Patrick's Cathedral down there, and this is it at ground level. We had lunch at the Todd English Food Hall at the Plaza Hotel on 5th Avenue, then a bit of window shopping before heading back to the ship. We enjoyed the sail away from our balcony, seeing many of the sights of Manhattan, old and new, at the beginning of our 7-day transatlantic crossing to end this wonderful Cunard World Voyage on Queen Victoria.